Hello and thank you for joining me today on today's video. My name is Joshua. This is the Power Recovery YouTube channel. If you do like the video, hit the like button below, share it with your friends and subscribe. The video I want to talk about today is on the subject of adaptive emotional regulation. So this is in contrast to maladaptive emotional regulation, which would be, if it's maladaptive, trying to manage our emotions through more addictive processes, things that actually compromise our independence, compromise our health, our integrity, and our self-esteem. Whereas adaptive emotional regulation, it's health enhancing, that it can have a very positive cascading effect on all of my life, that I'm not finding addictive processes to try and norm out certain emotions and difficult feeling states. Most of us from a young age, we're not really taught how to deal with boredom, rage, aggression, shame, guilt, emptiness. Most of us are never taught that. We're kind of mirroring out the roles that we've been given to us in our childhood, these adaptive roles. And it's an interesting turn of phrase, role model. What role did you model when you were younger? And we inherit these coping mechanisms, which are essentially usually most of the time useless. And unless you've come from a very healthy family, which is very rare, in the best of cases, some people are taught how to emotionally regulate from a young age and learn how to express certain feeling states, and that's fantastic. But for most of us, we're kind of confined to this adaptive child role. So we've had to adapt to the stress of the family. And whether that be in the role of a caretaker, an emotional caretaker, or you're the invisible child, or you're the rebel, or the offender, or the superhero, academic or athlete, whatever it is, we've learned sometimes when the stress in a family unit is so high and that we're not taught any coping mechanism, we're having to adapt to the stress of the family unit, and we end up gaining a series of different personas, and then we go out into the world and we're acting out of this persona rather than from an authentic self and who we actually are. The coping mechanisms what we got when we were younger to try and adapt to this stress are nowhere near as adequate as if we were to learn how to emotionally regulate. And I say this from my own experience, that I found that really, I think healing is a journey of two halves. You obviously want to get to the place that you're clean and sober, which was, for my own means, a massive milestone. And it's a massive milestone for anyone to get clean and sober and be off that for a long period of time, especially the first year. But the second half of healing really is the recovery, and it's more of a case of upgrading our coping mechanisms and learning now how to, actually thrive in life rather than just barely surviving like we did in our younger, more formative years. So, with adaptive emotional regulation, this is now where we're exchanging different coping mechanisms which might be not very healthy for us, that they're actually diminishing possible health, for a more functional coping mechanism. So for example, rather than me exploding every time I get angry, something that I do is I take deep breaths, and sometimes I even count to a minute, and then I proceed with what I want to do. One of the things my coach had actually said to me was that, rather than just kind of act out your programming, which in my family system was either to be quiet or to explode, rather than just acting out this kind of subconscious programming, it would be probably more helpful for you to think and then respond, rather than just emotionally react to everything in your environment, which is very good. And I've definitely used that a lot. For other people, it might be that you could be sad, and in your family system, your sadness was shamed. It's very common, in a lot of family systems where, say for example, a young boy is upset. You need to man up. You need to just get on with it. You need to push your feelings aside. And what ends up happening is one of the common, I think, symptoms for a lot of men is that the only feeling states they can have is composure or aggression. And it's like, well, what about the sadness? With your sadness, that is the drive for us to grieve. If you have all that sadness buried inside you, and it's been left there since your childhood, and you've never had a chance to express that with anyone, the chances are of developing things like anxiety or depression is probably a lot higher. When you cry, that's where you release so many toxins, and it activates that parasympathetic nervous system response, the relaxation response. It dissolves anxiety and shame and guilt and fear. So healthy to cry. But for a lot of us, and for women as well, a lot of times our tears are shamed. And that is one of the most effective grieving and healing strategies you can have. So there's a very kind of myriad of different techniques you can do, and it's all kind of individualized to the person. But we have to learn to kind of process these very difficult emotional states, dealing with shame, and because oftentimes I think if we don't deal with it, it will kind of be tainted in our thought process, and then that will kind of bleed into our behaviours. So if you're the kind of person, for example, say you in your family system, you're an emotional caretaker, and you couldn't have your anger available to you. Anger was shamed, or you were ignored, you were seen as disruptive, you were seen as the problem child if you were angry, or you were humiliated when you were angry, and you weren't taken seriously, for example. Then you grow up into your adulthood stage, that the problems that will cause you with boundaries and setting consequences with people, and having a sense of that I have my own rights. I have the ability to assert my own rights. If you haven't had your anger available to you, it's probably because someone's trespassed on your boundaries when you were younger and made it seem as though you have no boundaries, or you're not allowed to have any boundaries. It's kind of this family system rule of obedience without protest. Then the chances of you attracting an offender is probably a lot higher than if you had very strong boundaries. Does that make sense? So we have to upgrade our coping mechanisms. It could be, like I said, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. A big thing for me, and this is a really simple one if you want to try this at home, is sitting in the feelings without self-medicating or without acting out, right? So rather than exploding, which I was also very guilty of doing, or losing it, or being overly frustrated, it's okay to be frustrated, but you don't necessarily have to act it out. So we're learning how to process the emotion, or at least sit in it, because I find that I was becoming very reactive to my emotions, and being a very sensitive person, your emotions are always in constant flux, and having a kind of, because I am dyslexic, and I think I probably have some form of undiagnosed ADHD, my emotions are bouncing so quickly because of rapid thought changes, and being a sensitive person, you have these huge senses of surges of emotion, and you feel things very deeply. So when you are happy, it's amazing. It's just this oceanic joy. Life is amazing. But then because when you're a highly sensitive person, you feel things so deeply. When you're sad, you're really sad. Or if you're hurt, you're really hurt. So it is important. I say this from my own experience as well, but in general, if you are a highly sensitive person, or a HSP, highly sensitive person, that you will need to have I call it like ultra self-care. You're going to have to really take care of your emotions, because you probably experience bigger fluctuations in emotion on a moment-to-moment basis than the non-sensitive person. I think in most societies, highly sensitive people only represent about 20% or less of most populations. That would mean then about 80% of people are non-highly sensitive, that they don't feel things very deeply. So don't compare yourself to other people. I understand a lot of times with highly sensitive people, a lot of people try and fix you. They tell you what to do. They try and say, you need to toughen up, etc. Try and still embrace who you are. And just try and ignore people's opinions sometimes, and upgrade, more importantly, your coping skills. So like I said, a big one for a lot of people to try, and it's probably the more passive form of healing. I know Pete Walker talks about this in a lot of his books. Probably the most passive form of healing is just let the emotion run its course. Now, if you're, in the midst of your own sobriety, or you're under a lot of stress at the moment, to say, or just feel your feelings, the emotional voltage of your feelings might be a lot higher than the average individual, so you might need to lean on something else. I'm only giving some brief examples. I'd rather you go and use this video as a stepping stone to you to, inspire you to do your own research and look at some coping mechanism for yourself. For other people, it might be taking a hot bath. It might be having a hot shower. Another one is journaling. That's been a useful one for myself. There's many different forms of coping skills. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, it might be seeing a professional, working with a counsellor, working with a therapist, working with a life coach. Even, if you can't afford a counsellor or a therapist, there's so many helplines that are free, that you can ring up, and verbally ventilating like that and have you share your pain with someone, it essentially halves its power. So remember that. You don't have to do this all on your own. You'll probably find it very difficult to do on your own. And when you have a relationship like that, whether it be a therapist, counselor, coach, psychologist, whatever it is, psychotherapist, or if it is over a helpline, or say if it's a free meeting, there's so many different meetings that you can go to. And obviously with the meetings, I will say this, that sometimes I don't think meetings are enough and people can become addicted to the meetings. But what I will say is if you're doing a lot of your own self-healing stuff as well, if you're doing journaling, deep breathing work, cognitive behavioral therapy, all these different modalities, right? And you're going to meetings as well, I think that's perfectly fine. I think a lot of the times, and my coach talks about the kind of the negative sides of meetings, that a lot of the meetings are very outdated, but it isn't to say they're completely ineffective, just their success rate is usually pretty low. But if you're going with the predisposition of, I'm going there, I want to be around like-minded people, I want to come clean with some things that are on my mind and share some of my pain with other people, that can be very therapeutic and very healing. Obviously, a lot of the lingo and a lot of the texts and books and stuff associated with meetings are usually a little bit outdated, but doesn't mean that's just my opinion of my experience of going to meetings for quite a while. But there's loads. It doesn't have to be an AA meeting. There's many other meetings that you can go to. So when I'm saying the lingo in meetings is a bit outdated, I mean like AA and Coda and stuff like this. So yeah. So in terms of that, what I would recommend you doing as a bit of an exercise, try and write down all the emotions that you find difficult to cope with. So whether that be anger or frustration or aggression or rage or sadness, guilt, confusion, whatever it is, write them emotions that you feel you struggle with and try and find a healthy coping mechanism that you can link with these emotions, and write it down and make it clear, make it colourful, whatever you want to do with it, and save this on your notes on your phone, or have it on your laptop, or have it written down somewhere that you can see, that it reminds you of that when you feel them difficult feelings, that you lean on that healthy coping mechanism rather than a dysfunctional or a self-destructive coping mechanism. Okay? So I'm going to leave that with you there. I hope you've enjoyed that video. Like it, share it with your friends. I hope you have a lovely day, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.